"You are no longer my mother." Just one sentence, but it was enough to plunge the luxurious hall in Lagos into complete silence. Beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers, while the sound of violins echoed through the birthday celebration of a young billionaire, an old, poor mother was thrown out of the house by her own son. In front of hundreds of elite guests, no one knew that the woman wearing the faded old dress had sacrificed her entire life to turn the poor little boy she once raised into one of the most powerful men in Lagos. And no one could have imagined that just a few hours later, a horrifying secret would be exposed, bringing the entire Okoye family crashing down in a single night. There are people who, when they are poor, promise they will love and honor their parents forever. But once wealth arrives, they begin to feel ashamed of the very people who sacrificed everything for them. And sometimes, a single sentence spoken in arrogance can become a lifetime of regret. Tonight, from the glamorous city of Lagos, a city filled with luxury, but also hidden heartbreak and painful secrets, we bring you a story that left millions sitting in silence after hearing it to the end. A story about family, betrayal, and the terrible price of losing the people who loved you first. If you believe that parents should never be abandoned, make sure to subscribe and join us for more emotional and unforgettable stories. And now, listen carefully to the rest of this story, because what happened behind the doors of that mansion is something you will never forget. After Mama Grace left the mansion, the towering black wooden doors slowly closed behind her. Click. The sound was soft, but inside Kadeem's chest, it felt as though something had just collapsed. Outside, the rain had begun to fall over Lagos. Raindrops struck the massive glass windows of the mansion, creating a cold, endless rhythm in the night. And inside, the violinists started playing again. Elegant music filled the hall as if nothing had happened. The wealthy guests raised their champagne glasses once more. Polite laughter echoed through the ballroom. The scent of expensive perfume blended with the golden glow of crystal chandeliers. Everything returned to normal. Or at least, everyone pretended it had. Only one man remained standing motionless in the middle of that enormous room. Kadeem Okoye. He stared at the doors where his mother had just disappeared. And somehow, in that moment, his chest suddenly felt too heavy to breathe, as though someone had taken something incredibly important from his life. Not money, not power, not fame, but something that, once lost, could never truly be restored. No matter how much time remained in a person's life, Serena walked up beside him. Her tight red dress made her stand out among the crowd like the queen of the party. She smiled softly, the satisfied smile of someone who had finally removed what she no longer wanted to see. "Kadeem." Serena gently adjusted the collar of his suit. "You did the right thing." Kadeem said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the rain outside. Serena leaned closer to his ear. Her voice was soft, but every word felt like a blade. "If you truly want to belong among Lagos high society, you need to learn how to cut away the things that make you look weak." Kadeem tightened his grip around the wine glass. "She's my mother." Serena fell silent for a moment. Then she let out a quiet laugh. "So what? A mother can still drag her son back into the mud if she doesn't know her place." The words stabbed into Kadeem's chest. A small discomfort, but enough to make him look away. And yet, he still didn't argue. For years, he had grown used to remaining silent around Serena. She never screamed at him, never gave orders, never forced him to do anything. Serena simply planted thoughts inside his mind. Little comments, tiny disappointments, subtle reminders that, if he truly wanted acceptance from the elite, he needed to change. He needed to become colder, more sophisticated, more willing to bury the poverty he came from. And the most frightening part was that Kadeem had slowly begun to believe her. He became ashamed of the old house where he grew up, ashamed of his mother's simple accent, ashamed of the worn-out sandals she had worn for years. Until tonight, he had pushed his own mother out of his life, just to protect the illusion of perfection in front of strangers. The party continued. A giant birthday cake was rolled into the center of the ballroom. Guests applauded. Cheerful music echoed across the room. Serena stood beside Kadeem with a radiant smile. But for Kadeem, the sounds around him suddenly felt distant. He stared at the glowing candles on the cake. And suddenly, an old memory resurfaced. A birthday from many years ago. Back then, their tiny house stood in a poor alley on the east side of Lagos. His father had recently died, There was barely any money left. Mama Grace had searched through an old wooden box beneath the bed, counting every last coin. In the end, she could only afford a small loaf of bread. She placed a single candle on top of it, then smiled at her son and said, "Kadeem, today your mother couldn't buy you a real cake, but I believe one day God will give you a life bigger than anything I ever dreamed of." That night, little Kadeem hugged his mother tightly, and through tears he whispered, "When I become rich, I'll never let you suffer again." The memory sliced through him like a knife. Kadeem slammed the wineglass onto the table. "I need some silence." Serena frowned. "Now? Everyone is still here." "I said I need silence." His voice dropped lower. This time, Serena began to feel irritated, but she forced another smile. "Fine, but don't let emotions ruin tonight. You're not that poor little boy chasing after his mother anymore." The words struck his heart hard. Kadeem turned away. He walked through the long white marble hallway. His footsteps echoed through the silence. Framed family portraits lined the walls, and in the center hung a portrait of his father, Michael Okoye, the man who had built the foundation of their family empire. Kadeem stopped. His father's eyes in the painting looked strangely stern, as if they could see straight through him, as if they had witnessed everything that happened in the ballroom, as if they had watched an old mother being humiliated by her own son in front of hundreds of people. Kadeem quickly looked away, but the harder he tried to escape, the more he heard his father's voice inside his head. "What have you done to your mother, Kadeem?" He walked faster, until eventually, his feet stopped unconsciously in front of his father's old office. The heavy wooden doors had remained closed for years. Ever since Michael Okoye died, Kadeem rarely entered this room. Not because he didn't love his father, but because the room made him feel small. It looked nothing like the rest of the mansion. There was no luxury, no gold, no smell of power or wealth, only the scent of old books, old wood, time, and the memories of a family that once truly loved one another. Kadeem placed his hand on the doorknob. For a long moment, he couldn't bring himself to open it. Finally, he pushed the door and stepped inside. The room was dark and silent. Moonlight slipped through the curtains and illuminated the dusty desk. Everything remained almost untouched. His father's old fountain pen still rested in the corner. The notebooks were still neatly stacked, and in the center of the desk stood a small framed photograph. Kadeem picked it up. In the picture, Mama Grace was still young. She smiled brightly in a simple dress. His father stood beside her, and young Kadeem was grinning happily in his mother's arms. Kadeem gently touched her face in the photograph. That woman once had shining eyes, thick black hair, a smile that came from her whole heart. And yet tonight, she had stood in the ballroom like a stranger, old, lonely, trembling, treated like a source of shame by her own son. Kadeem's throat tightened. For the first time that night, he felt like crying. At that exact moment, a gust of wind slipped through the half-open window. A stack of papers fell onto the floor. Kadeem bent down to pick them up. As he opened the drawer to put them back, he noticed an old brown envelope inside. On the front was his father's familiar handwriting. Strong, sharp, but the sentence written there made Kadeem freeze. "Only to be opened when you betray your mother." His heart stopped. For several seconds, he simply stared. Cold sweat ran down his spine. How could a man who had died more than 20 years ago leave behind a letter that seemed to foresee this exact night? Kadeem sat down in his father's old chair. Outside, the ballroom was still filled with laughter. But inside this room, the silence felt terrifying. He opened the envelope. Inside was a long letter, yellowed by time. "Kadeem, my son, if you are reading this letter, then the thing I feared most has finally happened. You allowed wealth to make you forget the woman who sacrificed her entire life for you." Kadeem's hands began to shake. He continued reading. "I understand people. I understand the terrifying power of wealth. Poverty is not the most frightening thing in this world. The most frightening thing is when a person becomes ashamed of where they came from." Kadeem's eyes reddened. Every sentence pierced straight into his heart. "You may believe I built the Okoye family, but no, the person who truly built everything was your mother." His breathing became heavier. "When I lost everything, your mother sold her wedding jewelry so I could start over. When I was betrayed, your mother stayed awake sewing clothes through the night to pay the workers. When you became critically ill at 8 years old, Your mother knelt outside the hospital for 3 days begging doctors to save your life. Tears fell onto the letter. He remembered. He remembered everything. But for years, he had tried to forget. In every brick of this mansion, there is your mother's sweat. In every dollar of Okoye Holdings, there are your mother's tears. Kadeem covered his mouth. His entire body shook violently. The image of Mama Grace kneeling to pick up the broken watch in the ballroom flashed through his mind. Those fragile hands had once held him through the hardest years of their lives. And tonight, he had allowed her to bow her head before strangers. The letter continued. Before I died, I transferred complete control of Okoye Holdings to your mother. The mansion, the land, the shares, the investment funds, everything belongs to Grace Okoye. The glass on the desk slipped from Kadeem's trembling hand. It shattered against the floor. The sharp sound echoed like a sentence of judgment. Kadeem shot to his feet. That's impossible. But the letter remained there. And so did the truth. The woman he had just thrown out of the house was not a poor mother begging for sympathy. She was the true owner of everything. And the most painful part was that Mama Grace had probably known all along. Maybe she had intentionally worn the old dress. Maybe she simply wanted to see what the son she loved most would choose. His mother, or his pride. Kadeem rushed out of the office. He hurried back toward the ballroom. As soon as he arrived, he heard Serena laughing with a group of guests near the bar. At least this house finally feels cleaner now. Kadeem froze. The blood in his veins turned cold. Serena turned around. Kadeem, what's wrong? He looked at her, and for the first time in years, he no longer looked at his wife with love, but with fear and suspicion. What do you know about my mother? Serena hesitated. What do you mean? I asked what you know. His voice was low and cold. Her smile slowly faded. Kadeem, you're scaring me. He stepped closer. Did you know my mother wasn't poor? Serena stayed silent, only for a second. But that 1 second was enough to destroy everything inside Kadeem. You knew. Serena lowered her voice. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that she made you weak. She's my mother, and I'm your wife. For the first time, Serena nearly lost control. Who do you want to choose? An old woman who keeps dragging you back to your pathetic past? Or the woman who helped turn you into the symbol of Lagos? Kadeem stared at her for a long time. Then he remembered the look in his mother's eyes when she heard the words, "You are no longer my mother." There was no anger, no hatred, only the eyes of a mother who had been hurt so deeply. She no longer had the strength to blame her own child. Kadeem turned and ran. He rushed out into the rain. The guards quickly opened the gates. The road outside the mansion was empty. Mama Grace was gone. The mother, holding the tiny gift box in the rain, had disappeared. Only her old handkerchief remained near the steps, soaked with rainwater. Kadeem bent down and picked it up. It still carried his mother's familiar scent. Old soap, poverty, his childhood. And for the first time in many years, the most powerful man in Lagos broke down crying like a child. Outside, the rain continued to pour. And inside Kadeem's heart, everything had begun to fall apart. But he still didn't know. His father's letter was only the beginning. The next morning, the sky over Lagos was covered in heavy gray clouds. The rain from the night before had long stopped, but the streets were still glistening with water. Traffic stretched endlessly across Victoria Island. Car horns echoed through the busy morning rush. A convoy of black vehicles sped through the crowded streets. The Rolls-Royce in front moved silently. Inside the car, Kadeem Okoye sat motionless. He hadn't slept all night. His mother's old handkerchief was still clutched tightly in his hand since leaving the mansion, wrinkled, cold from the dried rainwater. But Kadeem held on to it as if it were the last thing connecting him to his past. Because after Mama Grace disappeared into the rain last night, he realized he didn't even know where his mother was. Beside him, Serena kept making phone calls nonstop. Her voice grew more unstable with every passing minute. Why is nobody answering? She clenched her teeth. I said, call the legal department immediately. No one responded. And that only deepened the panic growing inside her. Early that morning, the entire executive board of Okoye Holdings had suddenly called for an emergency meeting. No explanation, no internal email, no advance notice. Yet every major shareholder had appeared. That had never happened since Michael Okoye died. Kadeem. Serena turned toward her husband. Her voice softened intentionally. Listen to me. What happened last night isn't that serious. Maybe she just wanted to pressure you emotionally. Kadeem said nothing. His eyes remained fixed outside the window. Inside his mind, the words from his father's letter kept repeating over and over. The woman you always believed was poor is actually the owner of the entire Okoye fortune. Every time he remembered, his chest tightened painfully. The car slowly stopped in front of Okoye Holdings, a towering glass skyscraper rising over the heart of Lagos. It had once been the greatest pride of his life, a symbol of power, a symbol of success, a symbol of rising from poverty to the top. But this morning, it felt cold. Kadeem stepped out of the car. The reception staff and security team immediately bowed respectfully, but no one dared look him in the eye. The atmosphere inside the building felt strange, silent, heavy, as though everyone already knew a terrible secret, and only Kadeem still lacked the courage to face it. Kadeem. Serena hurried after him. You need to stay calm. No matter what happens, you're still the CEO. Kadeem didn't answer. The elevator doors opened. The top floor of Okoye Holdings appeared before them. The place where the most powerful meetings in Lagos were held. The place where, for years, Kadeem had always entered like a king. But today, for the first time, his legs felt too heavy to move. The conference room doors opened. And in that exact moment, Kadeem froze. Every shareholder in the room stood up simultaneously, not to greet him, but to greet the woman seated at the head of the table, Mama Grace. Time stopped. Kadeem almost didn't recognize his own mother. Gone was the faded dress from last night. Gone were the worn-out sandals. Gone was the quiet posture of a humiliated servant standing silently at the party. Today, Mama Grace wore an elegant emerald green aso oak outfit. A beautifully wrapped traditional gelée rested atop her silver hair. A simple pearl necklace lay around her neck, understated yet commanding. An ebony walking cane rested beside her chair. Her expression was calm. No anger. No resentment. And somehow, that calmness made the room feel even colder. Serena's face turned pale. Mother? No one answered her. The conference room remained completely silent. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning could be heard overhead. Mama Grace slowly lifted her gaze toward her son. Her eyes no longer carried the pain from last night. They were the eyes of a woman who had cried so much that she no longer had tears left to shed. The company's chief attorney slowly stood up. He opened a thick folder in front of him. His serious voice echoed through the room. According to the legal will of the late chairman, Michael Okoye, no one moved. Mrs. Grace Okoye currently holds controlling ownership of Okoye Holdings with 51% of all shares. The room froze. Serena stepped backward. Kadeem stood motionless. It felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. No, his voice cracked. That's impossible. But the lawyer continued. All strategic shares, international investment funds, oil assets, and commercial properties in Lagos and Abuja have remained under the ownership of Grace Okoye for the past 20 years. Whispers immediately spread across the room. Some shareholders lowered their eyes to avoid looking at Kadeem. Others silently watched his reaction. Because everyone understood, the man who threw his mother out of the house last night had never truly been the most powerful person in this room. Mama Grace gently rested both hands on her cane. Her voice rose slowly. Your father shed blood to build this company. She looked directly at Kadeem. And your mother sacrificed her entire life to keep it from collapsing. Kadeem couldn't speak. Old memories flooded his mind. Nights without electricity, his mother sewing clothes beneath an oil lamp until her fingertips bled. Mornings when she pretended she had already eaten, just so her son could have the last portion of food. The time she stood quietly outside his university gates, watching him in his London school uniform with tears of pride in her eyes. And then, Kadeem remembered himself from last night. You are no longer my mother. Now the words came back like a blade piercing his own heart. Suddenly, Serena stepped forward. Kadeem, you can't let this happen. Her voice trembled visibly. You're the CEO. You run this company. Mama Grace slowly turned her head towards Serena. Just one glance was enough to silence her. For the first time, Serena realized the woman she had always looked down on had never been weak at all. Mama Grace opened her handbag. She pulled out another file and placed it on the table. Oh, her voice became terrifyingly soft. And regarding Serena Blake's embezzlement of charity funds and illegal transfers of company money into private overseas accounts, Zarina froze. Her face lost all color. And, no, that's not. The chief attorney took the file. A second later, the massive screen behind the conference table lit up. Bank statements appeared one after another. Dubai, Singapore, London. Millions of dollars transferred across multiple accounts. Every recipient connected to Serena Blake. The room exploded into whispers. An elderly shareholder slammed his hand against the table. "This is criminal." Another stood up immediately. "We've been manipulated for years?" Serena panicked and turned toward Kadeem. "Say something." But Kadeem simply stood there, frozen. His eyes stopped on a small note at the bottom of the report. "Expenses for surveillance on Grace Okoye." His hands began shaking. He turned sharply toward Serena. "You hired people to spy on my mother?" Serena stepped backward. "Kadeem, I can explain." "Answer me." His voice thundered through the conference room. For the first time since their marriage, he screamed at his wife. Serena burst into tears. "I did it for us." "For us?" Kadeem let out a bitter laugh. A broken laugh filled with pain. "Or for money?" Serena remained silent. In that silence became the clearest answer of all. Mama Grace slowly stood up. The entire room instantly fell quiet. She looked at Serena. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Her voice was soft, but every word cut like ice. "It's not being betrayed by strangers." Mama Grace turned toward Kadeem. "It's watching your own son hand someone else the knife to stab his mother's heart." Kadeem lowered his head. He no longer had the courage to look at her. Mama Grace turned toward the shareholders. "Starting today," she said slowly, "Serena Blake is suspended from all involvement with Okoye Holdings until the investigation is complete." Serena nearly lost her mind. "You can't do this to me." Mama Grace looked at her, and for the first time, a faint smile appeared on her lips. Sad, exhausted, but powerful. "Last night you forgot something." She stepped closer with her cane. "The mansion you call home belongs to me." The room held its breath. "Every car you drive belongs to me." Mama Grace stopped directly in front of Serena. "And the woman you threw out of the house last night?" She looked straight into Serena's eyes. "Is the only person here who actually has the right to throw you out of everything." Serena stood speechless, unable to say another word. And Kadeem felt his heart breaking apart piece by piece, because only now did he finally understand the most painful truth of all. The poorest person in that room was not Mama Grace. It was him, a man who possessed everything Lagos could offer: money, power, fame, yet nearly lost the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally for his entire life. The entire Okoye Holdings boardroom nearly descended into chaos. The shareholders who had remained silent just moments earlier suddenly shot to their feet. The sharp scraping of chairs echoed across the marble floor. Phones vibrated nonstop. Whispers spread rapidly. Arguments were barely restrained beneath tense breaths. The atmosphere inside the luxurious room suddenly felt suffocating, like the air before a violent storm. Behind Mama Grace, the massive LED screen continued displaying confidential documents, wire transfers, bank statements, secret transactions spanning years. Dubai, London, Singapore, South Africa. Millions of dollars flashed across the screen, like hammer blows shattering the flawless image Serena had built around herself. The woman who once entered every party like a queen now stood frozen beneath dozens of cold stares. Even layers of expensive makeup could no longer hide the panic on her face. "Kadeem." Serena's voice trembled. "You have to believe me." Kadeem turned to look at his wife, the woman who once held his hand at lavish galas, who leaned against his shoulder in front of flashing cameras, who whispered to him, "A powerful man can never afford to be soft." That same woman had also made him ashamed of his own mother. The poor old village woman, the mother who dressed like a servant, the woman who didn't belong in high society. And the most painful part was that he had believed every word. Believed it enough to throw his mother out of the mansion with his own hands. Believed it enough to watch her trembling in the ballroom, while still choosing pride over her dignity. "Kadeem." Serena stepped closer. Tears streamed down her face. But this time, Kadeem no longer knew what was real. He no longer knew whether those tears came from love, or were simply another way to manipulate him. I did everything for us. Her voice cracked. The words echoed softly through the conference room. Small, but enough to make Mama Grace laugh quietly. A soft laugh. Not mocking, not victorious, just unbearably sad. She rested one hand lightly on her ebony cane and slowly stood. For us? Mama Grace looked at Serena. Her eyes were so cold that Serena instinctively stepped back. No, Serena. Her voice remained calm. You never did anything for this family. She pointed toward the screen. You did everything for your own greed. The room fell silent. No one dared move. Mama Grace slowly walked around the conference table. The steady sound of her cane tapping against marble echoed through the room. Her steps no longer trembled like they had the night before. Gone was the image of the poor mother thrown out of a birthday party. Today, she walked like a woman who had endured far too much. 3 years ago, the chief attorney pressed a button. An image immediately appeared on the screen. Serena sitting in a luxurious London restaurant with a foreign businessman. You began meeting with outside investment groups and secretly promised internal control if the opportunity came. Serena's face turned pale. That was just a business dinner. Mama Grace didn't respond. The screen changed again. Serena appeared outside a private bank in Dubai. After that, you opened multiple accounts under shell corporations. An elderly shareholder slammed his hand against the table. She's been planning this for years. Serena spun around furiously. You people don't understand anything. Her voice began cracking apart. I did it to protect Kadeem's position. Kadeem stared at her. There was no anger left in his eyes anymore. Only a cold, devastating disappointment. By stealing company money? Serena choked on her words. I wasn't stealing. It was financial strategy. Strategy? Kadeem laughed bitterly. A twisted laugh filled with pain. Was hiring people to spy on my mother also strategy? The room instantly fell silent. Even Mama Grace. Her eyes shifted slightly for the first time. The attorney opened another file. Secret surveillance photographs appeared across the screen. Mama Grace shopping at the market. Mama Grace praying quietly in a small church. Mama Grace standing alone beside her husband's grave in the rain. Mama Grace silently returning to the old house in Ajagunle. Every private moment of her life had been monitored as though she were some dangerous threat. Kadeem stood frozen. He stared at each photograph. And with every image, his heart hurt a little more. His mother had never lived like a wealthy woman. Even while owning nearly half the corporation, even while controlling everything, she still kept the old house, still visited the old market, still wore simple dresses, still prayed in the same church where his father once prayed, as though Mama Grace had never forgotten who she was. Only he had forgotten. Serena hadn't watched her because she feared her. She watched her because she knew Mama Grace was the true key to the entire Okoye fortune. Kadeem, Serena grabbed his hand. I was only afraid she'd take everything away from you. Slowly, Kadeem pulled his hand back. Not violently, not angrily, just coldly. No, he spoke softly. My mother never took anything from me. He looked directly into Serena's eyes. His own eyes were red with tears. She gave me everything. Serena broke down crying harder. She's turning you against me. That sentence made Mama Grace lift her head. She looked at Serena for a long moment, then turned to her son. Do you hear that? Her voice lowered quietly. That's exactly how she's controlled you for years. Kadeem stiffened. Mama Grace stepped closer. She never needed to make you hate your mother. She looked deep into his eyes. She only needed to make you feel ashamed of her. The words landed like stones. And for the first time, Kadeem began replaying everything. Serena once said, your mother dresses like a maid. Serena once said, don't bring her to corporate events. Serena once said, successful people know how to leave the past behind. At first, he resisted. He defended his mother. He argued. But slowly, he changed. He called his mother less often, visited less often, stopped eating meals with her, until eventually, he no longer saw anything wrong with making her eat in the kitchen. No longer saw anything wrong with placing her in the back row at his wedding. No longer felt pain when people mocked her humble background. And finally, he spoke the cruelest words of his life. You are no longer my mother. Kadeem staggered backward, both hands shaking violently. Mum, he whispered. But Mama Grace did not immediately look at him. Instead, she turned towards Serena. I know what you wanted. Her voice was calm enough to terrify the room. You wanted Kadeem trapped between his family and your ambition. Serena wiped her tears away. I love him. Mama Grace stared at her for a very long time, then slowly shook her head. No. She spoke carefully. You love the name Okoye. The room fell completely silent. You love the doors that name opens. You love the glamorous parties, the expensive cars, the newspaper headlines calling you the Queen of Lagos. Mama Grace paused briefly. You love the feeling of watching people lower their heads when you enter a room. Her voice tightened slightly. But you never loved the man inside my son. Serena fell speechless, unable to argue, because even she knew every word Mama Grace spoke was true. Kadeem lowered his head. Too late, he finally understood. Serena had always loved the powerful version of him. The rich version, the cold version, the perfect version. The man disconnected from the slums he came from, but the woman standing before him had loved him when he had absolutely nothing. When he burned with fever inside a leaking house, when classmates mocked his torn clothes, when he was so terrified of the dark that every night he clung to his mother crying, Mama. Mama Grace turned toward her son. This time, a tear rolled down her cheek. Only one. But it hurt Kadeem so deeply he could barely breathe. But the person most responsible, she said slowly, is not her. Kadeem lifted his head. The room became utterly still. It's you. Those two words struck directly into his soul. Mom, it's you, Kadeem. Her voice trembled. Because nobody could have humiliated your mother, unless you gave them permission to do it. Kadeem stood frozen. Mama Grace stepped closer. Strangers may laugh at me. Guests may look down on me. She pressed her hand gently against her chest. Serena may despise me. Her voice broke. But only you could hurt me so deeply I could no longer breathe. Kadeem closed his eyes. Tears poured down his face. Mom, I'm sorry. Mama Grace shook her head softly. Don't apologize simply because you were exposed. The words froze him completely. Apologize because you truly believed your mother made you ashamed. The atmosphere inside the conference room tightened painfully. No one cared about the money anymore. No one cared about the shares. Because before them now was not merely a financial scandal. It was a son being judged by his own conscience. Slowly, Kadeem dropped to his knees, right there in the middle of the boardroom, before the shareholders, before the lawyers, before the wife who manipulated him, and before the mother he betrayed. Mom, his voice shattered. I was wrong. Mama Grace looked at her son, her eyes filled with tears, but she did not step forward to lift him up, not because she didn't love him, but because some sons only understand the value of the person who stood behind them their entire lives. After kneeling before their own mistakes, Serena watched the scene in despair. She knew she had lost. Not because of the money, not because the evidence had been exposed, but because for the first time, Kadeem had finally seen who she truly was. A woman who turned love into chains, turned marriage into ambition, and turned a son into a man who betrayed his own mother. Mama Grace turned toward the attorney. Freeze every account connected to Serena Blake. Serena screamed, No. You can't destroy me. Mama Grace looked at her calmly. I'm not destroying you. Her voice remained steady. Your greed did that a long time ago. Then she turned toward Kadeem. And you? Kadeem looked up through tears. I will not punish you by taking everything away. His breath caught. I will punish you by letting you live with the truth. Mama Grace bent down. She removed the old handkerchief from her son's pocket. The same handkerchief she had dropped in the rain the night before. She stared at it quietly, as though looking back on her entire life as a mother. Then she placed it gently in front of her son. Last night, I did not come there asking for money. Her voice broke softly. I only wanted to know, inside that mansion filled with strangers, whether there was still anyone left who would call me mother. Kadeem collapsed into tears. But Mama Grace had already turned away. No insults, no hatred, no revenge. Only the silence of a mother who had suffered too much to even remain angry anymore. The conference room doors slowly closed behind her. Kadeem remained kneeling motionless on the floor. Serena stood frozen among piles of incriminating documents. And on the massive screen, the final photograph appeared. Mama Grace sitting alone in a small room. Her husband's memorial portrait resting before her. And in her hands, the same old watch. Below the image was a note from the investigator. Mrs. Grace Okoye still prepared a birthday gift for her son every year, even though Mr. Kadeem never came to receive it. Kadeem stared at the sentence. And in that moment, everything inside him completely shattered. Because he finally understood, he had not lost his mother in one single night. He had lost her little by little. Every time he chose silence over respect. Every time he turned away when she needed him. Every time he allowed money to blind him to the aging face of the woman who spent countless sleepless nights loving him. And some losses cannot be undone simply by kneeling down and saying, "I'm sorry." That night, the sky over Lagos was swallowed by storm clouds. Rain poured down violently. Lightning ripped across the darkness above the glowing skyscrapers of Victoria Island. The streets that were usually alive with luxury and noise now reflected only the cold shimmer of rain beneath the tires of a black Rolls-Royce speeding through the night. Inside the car, Kadeem Okoye sat behind the wheel. His tie hung loose to one side. His dress shirt was wrinkled. Wet strands of hair clung to his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, not only from exhaustion, but because all night long, he could barely breathe beneath the crushing weight of guilt. The phone on the passenger seat kept lighting up. Dozens of calls from shareholders, from lawyers, from the media, from Serena. Her name flashed across the screen again and again. But Kadeem answered no one. He called only one person, "Mama," over and over. His voice cracked with desperation. "Mama, please answer me." But on the other end, there was only a terrifying silence. Kadeem drove through the city streets, across the rain-soaked Third Mainland Bridge, past dimly lit night markets, through the narrow alleys where he once grew up before becoming the most powerful man in Lagos. But he couldn't find his mother. No one knew where she had gone. No one had seen her. No one answered their phone. And for the first time in his life, Kadeem understood what real fear felt like. Not the fear of losing money, not the fear of losing status, not even the fear of public humiliation, but the fear that one day, the mother who had always waited for him might no longer want to come back. Rain hammered against the windshield. The wipers scraped back and forth with an icy rhythm. Kadeem stopped at an old intersection. His eyes drifted unconsciously across the street. A tiny porridge stand was still open in the middle of the storm. Steam rose into the night air. And suddenly, an old memory crashed into him. When he was 12 years old, Mama Grace once stood in rain like this, selling food by the roadside. She wore an old faded scarf, both hands wrapped tightly around a pot of hot porridge. Rain soaked through her clothes until her body trembled. And yet when she saw Kadeem running toward her, she still smiled. A smile so gentle it hurt. "Mama only needs to sell a few more bowls. Then you can buy your school books." That day, young Kadeem threw his arms around his mother and cried. He swore to himself that when he grew up, he would never let her suffer again. But then, that little boy really did grow up. He became a billionaire, became a man all of Lagos respected. And in the end, he became the person who hurt his mother the most. Kadeem slammed his fist against the steering wheel. Tears burst from his eyes. "What have I done?" His broken voice disappeared into the sound of rain. The car sped forward once more. Around 3 in the morning, Kadeem suddenly remembered a place, Ajagunli, the poorest slum in Lagos. The place where his family once lived before Michael Okoye became successful. The place Mama Grace had never agreed to sell, even after she could have lived in the most luxurious mansion in the city. The Rolls-Royce slowly entered the muddy alleyways. Residents stared in shock at the luxury car appearing in the dark flooded neighborhood. Kadeem stepped out. His expensive leather shoes immediately sank into the mud. But he didn't care. He ran past the old houses, breathing hard. "Mama!" No answer. An elderly woman sitting beneath a small awning looked at him sadly. "Kadeem." Her aged voice rose through the rain. "Your mother is at the end of the alley. She went there this afternoon." Kadeem's chest tightened painfully. He immediately ran. At the end of the narrow alley, an old tin-roofed house appeared through the cold gray rain. A weak yellow light glowed through the window. Kadeem stopped breathing for a moment. It was their old house. The place where his father once lived. The place where his mother stayed awake all night sewing clothes. The place where his poor but loving childhood began. And now, it was the place his mother had returned to. After being rejected by her own son, Kadeem walked slowly forward. His trembling hand touched the old wooden door. He pushed gently. The door creaked softly open. Inside the house, Mama Grace sat alone before a small family altar. Michael Okoye's memorial portrait rested beneath flickering candlelight. She wore a simple, white outfit. Her silver hair fell softly over her fragile shoulders, and in her hands, she still held her husband's old watch. Kadeem froze in the doorway. His throat tightened painfully. "Mama!" His voice shattered. Mama Grace did not turn around. She continued staring at her husband's portrait. Outside, thunder roared across the sky. Rain pounded violently against the tin roof. Kadeem stepped inside, then collapsed to his knees on the cold floor. Rainwater dripped from his clothes onto the ground, but he did not rise. There was no CEO of Okoye Holdings anymore. No powerful man feared across Lagos. Only a son, desperately reaching for the last piece of love left before it was too late. "Mama." His voice trembled violently. "I'm sorry." Mama Grace slowly closed her eyes. A silent tear rolled onto her wrinkled hand, but she still did not look at him. "The day your father died," she whispered softly. Her voice nearly disappeared beneath the rain. "He still tried to shield you from the shattered glass with his own body." Kadeem broke down crying. The memory returned instantly like a nightmare. The overturned car in the storm, the piercing sound of shattering glass, his mother screaming, his father calling his name one last time. Michael Okoye had used his own body to protect his son. Glass pierced through his chest, but his arms still held Kadeem tightly until his final breath. "I once believed," Mama Grace's voice shook, "that after your father died, you would understand how important family truly is." Kadeem's trembling hands clutched the edge of her dress. "I was wrong." He lowered his face to the floor. "I don't deserve to be his son." At that moment, Mama Grace finally turned to look at him. In the instant he saw her face, Kadeem felt his heart being crushed, because he had never seen his mother look so old. After just one night, the woman who had always seemed strong before him looked completely exhausted. "What did I ever do wrong?" Her voice broke softly. "That made you ashamed of me?" Kadeem cried uncontrollably. "Please stop, Mama. The day you graduated in London." Mama Grace smiled sadly. "Your father was gone. So I wore the nicest dress I had just to watch you receive your diploma." She lowered her head. "But when I saw your wealthy friends," her shoulders trembled. "I stood very far away." Kadeem suddenly looked up. Mama Grace smiled through tears. "I was afraid you'd feel embarrassed." Those words completely shattered everything inside him. He remembered that day. He really had seen her standing far away, but he had been too busy taking pictures with his friends, too busy proving he belonged among the elite. And he left his mother standing alone in the cold throughout the ceremony. "I'm sorry." Mama Grace began crying softly. "I tried so hard to become the kind of mother who fit into your world." Kadeem wrapped his arms around her legs. "Please stop, please." His voice choked with tears. "I'm the one who should apologize." Mama Grace looked down at her son, her eyes swollen red. "Do you know what hurt me the most, Kadeem?" He shook his head weakly. "Not when you threw me out of the mansion." She gently placed her fragile hand on his head. "It was the look in your eyes." Tears fell onto his hair. "It wasn't the same look from the little boy who used to hold me at night and promise he would protect me forever." Kadeem collapsed into his mother's lap, crying like a child. Outside, the Lagos rain continued pouring endlessly. But inside that tiny old house, all the pain buried for years finally exploded into the open. Mama Grace trembled as she stroked her son's hair, exactly the way she had when he was little. "Kadeem." Her voice sounded weak. "Money doesn't change people overnight." She stared into the darkness outside the window. "It only makes them slowly forget who they used to be." Kadeem gripped his mother's hand tightly. "I'll make this right." Mama Grace smiled sadly. "Some wounds don't disappear just because someone says sorry." Kadeem's chest ached, because he knew she was right. Some words, once spoken, remain inside a person forever. "You are no longer my mother." Those words would stay with Mama Grace for the rest of her life, and they would become a scar inside Kadeem that would never fully heal. The candlelight flickered softly on the altar. Mama Grace looked at her husband's portrait, then gently held her son's hand. "Your father used to say," her voice trembled, "the most unsuccessful man is not the one who loses money." She looked deeply into Kadeem's eyes. "It's the man who loses his family." Kadeem broke down again. He held his mother tightly inside the small, worn-down house. Outside, Lagos still overflowed with skyscrapers, still pulsed with people chasing wealth and power. But in that moment, the most powerful man in the city wanted nothing more than to become that poor little boy again, to be held by his mother, to hear her familiar voice say once more, "My son." Several months passed, and Lagos still glittered as though nothing had ever happened. Lavish parties continued lighting up Victoria Island through the night. Luxury cars still lined up outside five-star hotels. Jazz music still echoed through grand halls filled with crystal chandeliers and champagne. The rich still laughed together. Million-dollar deals were still signed. Newspapers still published stories about the elite every morning. Life in that city did not stop for anyone's pain. But there was one name that slowly disappeared from everything. Serena Blake. No one saw her on red carpets anymore. No magazine published photos of her in expensive gowns. No glamorous party welcomed her entrance like a queen commanding every eye in the room. Everything vanished with chilling speed. People only whispered that, after the financial investigation at Okoye Holdings, many of Serena's secret overseas accounts had been frozen. The mansions she once proudly displayed were no longer under her name. The luxury cars once seen as symbols of status were quietly repossessed one by one. Then one very early morning, while Lagos was still asleep, Serena left Nigeria. No music, no flashing lights, no bodyguards. No one came to the airport to say goodbye. No one cried. Only a small suitcase, and the exhausted face of a woman who once believed ambition could buy the entire world. But greed was never meant to keep people flying forever. It only makes them believe they've reached the top before dragging them down to a place where no one wishes to offer a hand anymore. As for Kadeem Okoye, he was no longer the man of luxurious parties. After that rainy night in Ajagunle, he returned to Okoye Holdings, but not to reclaim power, not to save his reputation, and not to protect the CEO position he once treated as his entire life. That morning, Kadeem walked into the familiar boardroom. No assistants followed him. No reporters waited outside. He simply placed a resignation letter before the shareholders. The entire room fell silent. Many were stunned. Even the chief attorney looked up in surprise. Mama Grace stared at her son for a long time. "Kadeem, you don't have to do this." But he only lowered his head, his voice rough and quiet. "I do, Mama." He looked around the room where only months earlier he had knelt before his mother. "I used this CEO chair to convince myself that I was greater than my own family." A sad smile appeared on his face. "Now, I need to learn how to be a son first, before I deserve to learn how to be a leader." No one argued anymore, because in Kadeem's eyes that day, there was no longer the arrogance that once made all of Lagos cautious around him. Only a quiet pain, and sometimes, pain is the very first thing that truly wakes a person up. From that day on, people rarely saw Kadeem in the media again. He sold many of his unnecessary luxury cars, canceled meaningless parties, refused glamorous interviews. Many people claimed he was destroying his own image. But only Kadeem understood. For the first time in years, he had finally started living honestly. Every morning, he personally drove Mama Grace to the small church in Ajagunle. No security escorts, no motorcade, just a silver-haired mother sitting quietly by the window and a son silently driving beside her. Every afternoon, he took his mother to the Lagos shoreline. They sat for hours on an old wooden bench watching the waves crash against the shore. No one recognized the man who had once been the most powerful billionaire in the city, and no one knew the elderly woman beside him was the true owner of the entire Okoye empire. In the beginning, Mama Grace still spoke very little. She never blamed him, never repeated the painful words from the birthday party. But somehow, that silence hurt Kadeem more than any anger ever could, because he understood his mother was no longer angry. She was simply tired. Tired from loving too long, sacrificing too much, and being wounded by the child she loved most. Many nights, Kadeem stood outside his mother's bedroom door for a long time. He heard her coughing softly in the dark. He heard the faint sound of prayer beads moving through her fingers. He heard her unconsciously whisper Michael Okoye's name in her sleep. And every time, his chest tightened with pain. He once believed he was the richest man in Lagos, but eventually he realized a person could own an entire city and still be desperately poor, if his mother no longer looked at him with the same loving eyes as before. One evening, the sun slowly disappeared beyond the Lagos coastline. Golden light stretched across the water. Mama Grace sat on their familiar wooden bench. Kadeem sat beside her. The ocean breeze moved gently through her silver hair. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Mama Grace slowly pulled a small box from her pocket. The box was wrapped in old newspaper. The moment Kadeem saw it, his heart tightened painfully. It was the gift from that night. The gift she brought to his birthday party, but never had the chance to give him. Mama, his voice trembled. She placed the box into his hands. Open it. Kadeem unwrapped the newspaper carefully with shaking fingers. Inside was his father's old watch. The glass was scratched with age. The leather strap was worn, but the hands of the watch still moved. Tick, tick. A sound so soft it nearly disappeared into the ocean waves. But to Kadeem, it felt like his father's heartbeat still remained inside it, reminding him what truly mattered. Mama Grace gazed out toward the sea. Your father wore that watch the day he saved you. Her voice was quiet. Before he died, he told me. Her words caught in her throat. If one day Kadeem forgets who he is, give this watch back to him. Kadeem gripped the watch tightly. Tears fell onto his hands. I planned to give it to you at your birthday party. Mama Grace turned toward him. But that night, you didn't want to receive it. Kadeem lowered his head. I'm sorry. Mama Grace smiled sadly. I know. Just 2 words. Yet enough to make Kadeem break down crying. Because finally he understood. His mother had forgiven him little by little. Not because he deserved it, but because a mother's heart always leaves a small space for her lost child to come home. Mama Grace rested her hand on her son's shoulder. Kadeem. Kadeem. He looked up. Your father used to say, the poorest man is not the man without money. She looked deeply into his eyes. It's the man who loses his family. Kadeem nodded through trembling tears. I understand now, Mama, but she gently shook her head. No. Her voice was soft. You've only just begun to understand. Those words left him silent for a long time. And he knew she was right. Because repentance does not end with tears. It begins with the small things afterward. Sitting beside your mother when she's tired, patiently listening as she repeats an old story, cooking a meal for her with your own hands, never again feeling ashamed to hold her hand in public. And understanding that, parents do not expect their children to repay every sacrifice they made. They only hope never to become a burden in their children's eyes. Several years later, Okoye Holdings had a new chairman. Mama Grace still remained the controlling owner, and Kadeem only returned to the company when she believed he was finally ready. Not because he had become smarter, but because at last, he had learned how to bow his head. Inside Kadeem's new office, there were no more photographs of glamorous parties. No more flashy awards. Only one old picture standing in the center of the room. A poor mother holding her little boy inside a tin-roofed house in Ajagunal. Below the picture were words written by Kadeem himself. Never be ashamed of the person who prayed for you when you had nothing. Every employee who entered his office noticed the old watch resting on his desk. It was not the most expensive thing he owned, but it was the most valuable, because that watch reminded him some doors of power can be opened with money, but the door leading back home can only be opened with gratitude. And the birthday night years ago would forever remain a scar in Kadeem's heart, not to destroy him, but to remind him every day. Do not wait until your parents turn away in tears, before realizing they spent their entire lives standing behind you. Do not wait until the house grows silent, before understanding how precious your mother's voice truly was. And never allow a stranger to teach you how to feel ashamed of the people who gave you life. Because in the end, money can be earned again. Reputation can be rebuilt. Companies can be saved. But a mother's heart, once shattered by her own child, will always carry pieces of pain that time may soften, but never completely erase.